Why are Ireland and Wales so different in terms of politics, culture, language, religion? This has its source, truly, in the Protestant Reformation and the series of ruptures that truly took hold in the 16th century, and the way they interacted with this faith so differently. And coming from a Welsh viewpoint, that's what we focus on in this video as we go into the late 16th century in Wales and our history. This is Benjamin. Let's go. To understand this era, I have to jump with you over into England during the 16th century, especially earlier, was a mess. And I just need to explain what happened quickly. When the Tudors took over in the 1480s, they were a new dynasty, and this caused problems of legitimacy. Henry VII's son, Henry VIII, there were a lot of them, slept with a lot of people, and this got him into problems with the Pope, so he hopped on the coattails of the Protestant Reformation sweeping Northern Europe and began the English Reformation. However, he died only with the heir of a 9-year-old son, Edward. That's not old enough to truly take power. And there were questions of who would take over if King Edward died, as young kings often did. And he did die. And a young Lady Jane Grey took over, ruling for only 9 days before she died or was executed. And then a Catholic took over, reversing what had been done. Queen Mary. She ruled for 5 years up until 1558, when she died. And then Queen Elizabeth, a Protestant, who none had really expected to ever take the throne, took over. And she ruled for 45 years, all the way until 1603, and most of this video is during her reign. And we just need you to understand that this was a long, prosperous, relatively peaceful age under Elizabeth. We Welsh became a diluted minority, not deluded, but diluted. More English, but aware constantly that we are another, we are Welsh, and in this, we became a bit like Jews in the sense that we took on the surnames of our inhabited culture, but we kept something of our own and, later on, certainly our religious traditions. We Welsh colonized the professions. The upper echelons colonized law and the legal professions. We became doctors. We went to the prestigious universities. We advanced ourselves up the ranks by diluting our Welshness. The more Welsh you lost, often the greater promotions you gained. But retaining a bit of Welshness, whilst doing that, gave us a bit of power, because England wanted to expand, and that meant they had to become British, and they understood through the Tudors, we were the British. In Wales itself, agriculture shifted. You had cattle droves going deep into England. This economy shifted into an extractive nature, of a more complicated nature. You have the first mineral exploitations in Castellnef, Abertawe, Morgannwg. You have the Irish road opening up across the north, and those in Dyffryn Clwyd and Flint, they were able to take advantage of this by amassing estates around the lands through which these coaches passed. And you had great landed estates rising up to the families of the Owens and the Gwynns. A new economy arose. The first bits of truly capitalistic exploitative industry. But this was geared not to serve our own people, but to feed resources, raw materials into England. The great landowners certainly took root in Gwent and Morgannwg in a way that they had not before. The opportunities were of course in law, and the gentry competed to send their sons to English institutions to then come back and serve in the regime in Wales, because though our legal system and our existence had legally been abolished, there were semi-artificial structures serving Wales as an entity. The courts, the Welsh sessions, the Great Sessions, the Council of Wales, and those who could take advantage of these legal opportunities amassed wealth, which then allowed them, through their estates, to invest in the exploitation of raw minerals. Capitalistic industry took hold, and men of aspiration looked into the soil and thought, what elements can we rip out and shape into produce? Ironically, it was not always these who were the Protestants, though they would flip eventually. Many of the aristocracy tried to hold on to Catholicism, but in this new European Protestantism, a new wave of upwardly mobile Welsh appeared, and Queen Elizabeth, she was aware that she did not want another Ireland, did she, in Wales? No. Under Queen Elizabeth, 13 of the 16 Welsh bishops during her reign were Welshmen. That's unheard of before. England did not want too many upstart Welsh, but she was keen to avoid any kind of religious-based revolt because of what had happened in her family. She wanted stability, and this we rewarded her in kind with loyalty, because our young men, if they could not go into law, then here in Wales they could aspire to rise through the church, and they did in Protestantism and new Renaissance learning. And this learning was understood to benefit us and the stability of England, and through this they said, well, we need a Welsh institution in England for learning so that they don't get too many ideas. And in 1571, Jesus College, Oxford was opened up as explicitly for Welsh people. It was a Welsh college, and this became an institution, a Welsh institution, giving us an official institutional recognition that of course was not surrounded by Welsh sentiment. An astute tool for English propaganda and the colonial regime, but also one which we were keen, very keen to take advantage of to better ourselves and reach aspirations. And in these same moments in which we were turning to this new Renaissance Protestantism in learning, the Catholic nations of Europe, 1545, the Council of Trent, were organizing a council for a counter-reformation. And England again doubled down, rewarding us explicitly when we were loyal. Because Ireland was just on the doorstep. You had Irish pirates, wars with Spain fought on the open seas mostly. And they did not want this to infiltrate into Wales, which had rebelled in the past. And in the past, there was Rome. And this was a problem because we were breaking officially with Rome. And so where could England look to find a glorious imperial past that was not Roman, to challenge any say of them of right to rule. In the Welsh tradition, of course, the British, the tales of King Arthur, the tales of Merlin, the pre-Roman tradition of Ceridoc, and the Welsh tradition of Prince Madog sailing to America. This became a tool to reshape and mold into propaganda for England's right to colonize an America that was monopolized by Spain. And Ireland became an extension of this King Arthur legend. This Arthurian cycle was altered into an English vehicle of propaganda, a weapon against its Catholic enemies. The New World required an old prophecy. And we again harked back to Geoffrey of Unwin, Geoffrey of Monmouth, and his Historia Regnum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain, to dig into right and birthright for not just Britain but the Americas. But the Italian humanist school challenged this. The Counter-Reformation did not come without counter-histories. And King Arthur's clearly a myth. And so historians from Italy, like Polidoro Vergil, came to challenge this and offer an English history that was not British or Welsh. And we came out viciously to defend, and new thinkers arose on our side to defend England against the Italians. We had a collection of Tudor Renaissance humanists, usually Oxford educated. You get Welsh or Anglo-Welsh scholars like Sir John Prys writing histories to defend the British claim. Humphrey Llwyd of Dinbych creating maps with histories attached to them. His motto, oh, I like his motto, Hui periclod na golid. Hui periclod na golid. Fame lasts longer than wealth. Oh, that's a good motto. And this culminated in William Camden's Britannia, a fabulous display weaving history and map-making. The British Arthurian cycle reached its climax in learning, poetry, public ritual and propaganda in Philip Sidney's vision of a Renaissance Protestant chivalry in the service of the British Empire in the 1580s, the years of Spenser's Faerie Queene, when relations between Britain and Spain degenerated into open war on the high seas, when the enterprise of Drake, Gilbert and Raleigh precipitated the crisis of the Spanish Armada. 1588 was a big year. The Spanish Armada as well as our Welsh Bible. And we Welsh were the most direct inheritors of this British tradition, which had so informed there in England their own identity against this Catholic power. At the moment Henry Tudor had marched out of Wales before Malory had printed his Morte d'Arthur. This Arthurian cycle was coming up over and over again to reshape England, and we Welsh took part in this. New thinkers built upon these knowledges. Robert Record invented the equal sign, a Welshman. I mean, think of how different the world would be if this Welshman had not invented the equal sign. Well, that's a small thing, but its reverberations are immense. And you had a peculiar figure, Dr. John Dee. Dee is the English disfiguration of Dyfrdwy, the river. He was of this Anglo-Welsh group. He was into occultist Jewish Kabbalah imagery, which I'm not too keen on as someone who follows bits of that belief. But it's important because he wove this into Queen Elizabeth's court and these notions of prophecy. This Anglo-Welshman coined the term British Empire. That's something we Welsh need to think about. Someone of our inheritance, with Welsh language books in his house, well versed in Merlin's prophecies, coined the term British Empire. He took a Welshman of the occult and his mysticism fusing with English nationalism to create the very concept of the British Empire itself. Now, we did not have Scotland with us yet, but there was clearly an expansive claim. You had Ireland there, plantations being put in, and colonies in the New World. England was growing. And we needed a new name for England if Welsh was going to be included or absorbed into that. And so it became more and more the concept of Britishness, an invention for a wondrous propaganda machine to conquer new lands in a sea that now for the first time offered something beyond it, a land beyond the Atlantic Ocean, which John Dee called Atlantis. That's fascinating. And in Welsh, the land itself, not America the state, Amerig, the land is called Amerig. The nation is America. At least that was what it was for about 4 centuries in Welsh, and I prefer to keep it, but most don't. Books came out about these new navigations, calling it a praise of the English nation, Welsh authors calling it this. John Dee's Perfect Art of Navigation. Robert Hakluyt's Principal Navigations, Voyages, Traffics and Discoveries of the English Nation. Including ourselves in the English nation's discoveries of the New World was not a paradox to us, because they were using our Arthurian mythology to claim rule over it. And the English inversely saw no paradox in lowering Saxon King Edgar and raising up King Arthur above their own kings, because British meant something bigger than England. And so they could pick and choose the Welsh that they wanted. And we were happy to go along in exchange for title, rank and prestige. Turning your coat is very Welsh. This mythology was no less at home to the Tudor humanists here in Wales. We were battling for the religious spirit of this nation. We were not all Protestant yet. Fida Saeson, the faith of the English, was what we called Protestantism to begin with. It was the upper class who held on to Catholicism. The lower classes took on Protestantism earlier. That's a complete flip from Ireland, isn't it? I mean, I cannot stress that Ireland and Wales, we totally diverged from this point in the 16th century in the Protestant Reformation. We in Wales were openly hostile to Ireland from this point. I mean, we're talking 5 centuries. Even that tradition would affect the choices of David Lloyd George far later, and the formation of the Irish Republic itself, and our views toward them, and how we fought as soldiers in England's wars, how our poets wrote about them. It wasn't in any sense of camaraderie or praise, no. We took a sense of political and faith experience that was much more like the Netherlands and Norway than it was like Ireland. This is a divergence that affects us still and ever since. We are not like Ireland from this point, the last 5 centuries. And dare I say it, even today, Brexit, well, that's debatable in terms of who was born here, but we diverge still on identity issues. We kept the language and they didn't, that's another longer story. But I say this to hammer home the point that this Protestant Reformation is a wedge which forever puts us and Ireland apart and on different paths. I would dare wager that this continues today. In our politics, how we view ourselves, it's very different to Ireland and their government today. It's a different path, and it's born in this Protestant Reformation. These Catholics did not just roll over and die. They established a cave in Llandudno's Gogarth, a printing press. They're like secret agents disseminating illegal texts. But in the end, they were forced into exile back to the Italy that was funding them, Venice, Milan, Rome. And they briefly had a flurry of writings in Welsh. But it's the Protestants, with the backing of the state and the English printing presses in Oxford, London, and Cambridge, that were able to succeed. In 1546, in a Llyfr Hwn, that's not the title of the book, it's the first sentence, it didn't have a title, was the first printed book by that man, Sir John Prys. That's an important milestone. We begin books in our own language quite early for a non-state language. And in 1588, William Morgan's Bible, I cannot hammer home the significance of this. We were perhaps the first non-state language in the world to have our own Bible in our own language. I mean, please say if I'm wrong, but we had a Bible in our own language at a time when doing so was more than the sums of money of most nations to even put together. I mean, you had to have the finest education, and William Morgan came from Cambridge in his schooling, a Welshman, understanding the Hebrew and the Greek, leading a team of people to put this massive work together. We had a monumental work, and this secured like an anchor the Protestantism of Wales. It was, in a sense, the price of our loyalty to the empire. It secured the existence of our language. Without this, we would not even be speaking a Gymraeg heddiw, the Welsh language today. Not a chance. The sermons would have gradually forced English into our culture. Our language would have been eroded and erased, wishingly forgotten. That inconvenience of another language existing within the nation realm melted away at speed like Cornish. At this time, Irish and Scots Gaelic, they were transcribing their heritages through manuscripts by the arduous labor of the pen. In 1620, a revised version of the Bible came along, and we had a Babel Bach, a smaller, easily accessible religious work to common people, and Cynwal Cymru, the Welshman's candle. Common folk, if they had books at all, and they were Welsh, had these. And so literacy arose very strongly in Wheat Welsh, where it did not in the other Celtic languages. That's important to understand. But gentry were carefully teaching their sons English, and though they generally made their sons' wives learn Welsh, there was a decline in the quality of Welsh, most notably in the poetry. The great century before this of Tír Aled, Gythar Glyn, the great gentry poets had passed, and the poets agonized over this. Carawys. There were two Eisteddfods held, one in 1528 and the other in 1567. They were debating on how to save the old poetic order of 1,000 years, and this new Oxford, Cambridge, Renaissance Tudor man was speaking of a learning that was at odds with the 1,000-year-old tradition of the poets. This battle between Renaissance Protestant humanism and traditional local identity Catholicism reached a climax in our poetry with two poets exchanging letters and a series of cywydau, strict rhyming meter poems, back and forth between each other. This was William Cynwal, master of the Old Poets Guild, and Edmund Prys, Archdeacon of Merioneth, Cambridge educated. These were two worlds, a Renaissance learning seeking to save us through faith and the new printing press by encoding our language in the new medium. But the old ways understood that this would have meant through the English state and its control over us, and it resisted. Umrason, a battle between poets. These men exchanged letters and poems over years. It's a treasure trove. If you ever get this book, I'll put a link down below if I can find it. The Protestant Renaissance men won in the end, but they themselves lost their Welshness gradually. The last of the old poets died in 1666, Gruffydd Philip of Ardudwy. This was the end of a tradition that is unparalleled in its longevity in all of Europe, and that came to an end largely because of Oxford and Cambridge, of the Protestant Reformation, and especially the coming of the printing press. We desperately tried in this Tudor Renaissance to build a canon of classical learning in our own language, and we failed utterly. But the point is that we tried, and we at least have some small bursts of this great Renaissance entering into our language, which is more than most small languages at the time could have ever hoped for. And this failure stems largely because we, seeking challenges and new ideas and inspiration from Europe, we were deeply Europe at this time, proudly European, wanting to indulge in the classical learning. We found that so many of these texts and offerings were already at hand in English, and so rather than challenge ourselves, Welsh became something that we looked to for familiarity, comfort, family, the old way of life that meant something to our childhood. And it's from this point, this Protestant Reformation, that we see the decline. Welsh is beginning to retreat. Having that Bible saves us a lot of time and space. It holds off death, certainly, but there is a lack of modernity beginning to appear in the Welsh language, and it's now retreating to the museums. And you have the common folk taking up the mantle. Books of carols become distributed, and travelling dramas and interludes. The common people are now writing their songs, and it's good, but you can't have an entire culture that is just about the peasantry. It doesn't work. You have Beirdd Cefnglod, the poets of the back country, basically the peasants, but it's lacking in education, it's lacking in tradition, it's helping dilute Welsh into a series of patois. That's not how a language survives, it's how a language dies. When you no longer have the gentry, a language promoted by those in power. I hope that glimpse into the 16th century, especially the reign of Queen Elizabeth, gives you a greater understanding of how we in Wales tried, at least, to partake in the Renaissance, and how the new Protestant faith shaped us and enabled us to take a different path to other Celtic nations. More English, yes, certainly, but enabling us to adapt in a way that others did not. And our language today is healthier in its state than any are for it. And next time, we continue into this Renaissance and the rupture that comes when the dynasty of the Tudors falls without a true heir. May I take this opportunity to thank my Patreons on the screen now. Thank you for your contribution. Diolch yn fawr am eich cyfraniad. And for any of you who leave a super like, contribute via the comments, or donate buy me a coffee, thank you. You keep the wind in the sails of this channel blowing, and we're going to keep going. Au revoir.